All right, quick question for you. Who do you want to be like? Or another way to say it, who do you want to be like when you grow up? And I know you think that's just a kid question, but it's an everybody question. There's always a season ahead of you, like, well, I want to be like them. If I was navigating what they're navigating, I wish I could respond that way. I want to be that kind of grandparent. That's what I want to be like in my 30s. That's the kind of career that I want to have and how I want to do it. But we all have this idea of like who we want to be when we grow up or who we want to be in this next season. And I think it changes. I think it changes maybe when you're younger and hopefully matures a little bit as you get older. When I was young, and this is going to be generationally specific, but I wanted to be MJ. I wanted to be Michael Jordan. You need to laugh that hard. But so all 4 foot of me would try to drive to the basket with my tongue hanging out, and I would have Gatorade and, do the whole deal. I wanted Jordans. I was like 10 years old. My mom wouldn't get me Jordans because they were too expensive. Just real quick, do you know Jordache, the company Jordache? Like jeans, they're known for jeans, right? Do you know they make basketball shoes, or they did? I don't know if they still do. This is from the 90s. They do. They make them because I had them. At 10 years old, I didn't have Jordans, but I had Jordaches, and I was hoping nobody could tell the difference. And then I remember playing basketball with like other 10-year-olds at my church on the basketball court, and the worst thing imaginable because they're like, "What are those? The new Jordans?" And I'm like, "Well, they're the new Jordaches." And so I was like, "Don't worry about it." So it was horrifying because I didn't want anybody to like know. It's just I was hoping maybe they could pass as Jordans. I don't know. So that was my experience. Later on, my idols were like short people that could shoot a 3 and had no athletic ability. I was a big Mark Price fan, and so it evolved. If I was clued in, the appropriate idol should have been like a horse jockey, but I didn't get that far. But anyway, so who do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be like? And it does mature. Like, here's the thing I think for some of you to like adult years, it generally moves from what they did to who they are. And then all of a sudden some people, pop up in your mind like, I want to be them because of who they are, because of how they have lived. Whether it was navigating a difficult time, how they raised their kids, how they moved through that season, just the kind of person that you're around them and they're just inspiring. So who is that person for you? Because I bet there's somebody, and they don't even have to be alive or in your life anymore, but you would think, that's who I want to be. Even at 70, you can say, like, that's still who I want to grow up to be. And just imagine for a second, whoever that person is that pops into your mind. Imagine if everybody in your community, to think really broad for a second, everybody in your family, everybody in your neighborhood or the corporate environment that you work in, the people that you want your kids to marry. What if everybody was like that person? At some level, I don't think it's an overstatement. They kind of became a hero. We all have those in our life. And they became a hero because of their choices, because they chose and responded their way into kind of the top 2 or 3 list of people we admire and inspired by to go, I'm not there yet, but that's how I want to live my life. And the thing is, like, this is what we look to, but what about on the other side of it? What if when you walked out here today, there were other people that looked at you? This is the thing that I think about because I got 4 kids, but I'm raising 3 boys, and it's relevant to my girl too, but there's something about raising boys for me anywhere. I think about this so much. It's one of the things I think was like the driver for this series where I want to be this, and I don't always feel this, but I want to be in process and moving in this direction. Like I want to be that person, and for all of us, on the other side of like, what if you lived a life in such a way that you were that person for somebody else? And really it comes down to what we talked about in the series. That we got to live a life. I've got to live a life and keep moving in the direction to do what I ought to do, even when it costs, to do what you ought to, even when it costs you, even when it's really, really hard. And so that's what we're talking about in this series. Your integrity, our world. And here's what we said about integrity. Integrity is basically the resolve to do what is right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You actually don't know if you have integrity until a decision costs you. You don't really know where you're at. Here's a simpler definition. It's just doing what you ought to, even when it costs you, even when it's hard, even when not covering it up, telling them the truth, doing it anyway, deciding not to do that deal, even though it would benefit me financially. I'm going to do what I ought to, even if it costs me or maybe even costs my family. And here's the thing. All of us at some level value this, even if we're not sure about God. Like there's a standard we point to where we expect, isn't this true? We expect other people to have integrity, like not lie to you, not rip you off. Like I think that points to the fact that even if you're not sure about God, that there's a God, that there's this outside standard that presses on your conscience. And there's sometimes where we didn't create it, but we can't shake it. There's certain like trips home or from that thing or that business trip or spring break, whatever, you wish you could get rid of it. but you didn't really create it and you can't shake it, but it's just there and it presses on your conscience because we all have this idea about integrity and we expect it and celebrate it in other people, even if we don't live up to it ourselves. And the thing about integrity is it's always personal, it's never private. Because a failure integrity, like when my integrity doesn't hold up, when I make a decision that is not the right decision, or I'm trying to manipulate or circumvent some kind of outcome, it always impacts other people. And eventually, your irresponsibility and my irresponsibility when it comes to integrity becomes somebody else's responsibility. And some of you feel that because maybe it was a sibling, you had a brother or sister, and you didn't even do it, but their irresponsibility, you were left carrying the weight of what they did or didn't do. Or maybe some of you, you got a story of a mom or a dad and their irresponsible decisions and what they did or didn't do or what they didn't get help for. That irresponsibility ended up being your responsibility and you kind of had to carry that thing. And so the reality is the opposite, though, is true as well, because when you do what you ought to, it impacts other people in a positive way, sometimes a multi-generational way. So here's our guide verse for this series. It comes from Proverbs. The integrity of the what? Upright will what? Guide them. That will inform or direct all of their decisions. Even when it's hard, it's going to cost. Am I going to lose the relationship? What about the market share? How are they going to look at me? Are we going to miss out? Am I not keeping up? But we know this is the right thing, and so our decisions are going to be directed by our integrity. The upright means they're looking forward, weigh decisions in the light of the future. Not looking down to where we're responding to what is right in front of us, what's here today, but it's not going to matter in 5 years. It's all about ultimate, not immediate. It's all about later. It's not about now. And the integrity upright, they lead them in this direction. But this is an old school verse, but I love the verse. But the crookedness of the treacherous are literally in the Hebrew to cover something with a blanket. That integrity doesn't mean you never mess up. It means when you mess up, you don't cover up. When you mess up, you try to own up. You try to fix it. That's what integrity is. And those who don't live that way, it's heart's language, but at some level, it can destroy stuff. It can destroy a relationship, a marriage, a dream, financial stability, this next season of your life, your relationship or your peace with yourself. And so the writer of Proverbs is this is everything. This has the potential to set the course, the direction, even the quality of your life. So with that said, last week, we looked at an Old Testament example that was basically an example of what not to do. This week, I want to look at another Old Testament example that literally gives us the way forward and gives us this picture of what it looks like when our integrity really will cost us. That doing what is right ultimately will cost us. It picks up in about 605 BC, and there's a historical figure by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. And he basically, at the Battle of Carchemish, which is named for the area it was in, overruns and overtakes the Assyrians and the Egyptians, and then he makes vassal empires or states out of every area in between. So he conquers these nations, and he makes vassal states out of them. He eventually gets to southern Judah, which is Israel. Jerusalem is all a part of that, and he conquers them as part of all of this. He inserts a new king, because that's what Nebuchadnezzar did, and then he took their king, and does anybody collect anything? Nebuchadnezzar, it's not a joke, collected kings. So he would go into empires and he would take their king, and then he would hold these kings up, and he would have dinner parties, parade them out with chains around their neck and look at my king collection, literally, to show off his power. He's crazy. So that's Nebuchadnezzar. So he takes their king, inserts a new one, overtakes southern Judah and all of these other empires, makes them vassal states, and that's where the narrative picks up that I want to look at in Daniel chapter 1, verse 3. It says, Nebuchadnezzar, who I just talked about, ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family of the nobility. So just real quick, Nebuchadnezzar was smart, man, really shrewd, really brilliant. You don't get to the most powerful place in the world without being that. He was also incredibly brutal. But he basically tells his guys, okay, we're going to go in there, overtake them, and then get all the top 30 under 30, all the tech entrepreneurs, high IQs, a lot of educate. We want to get the best of the best, bring them over to our empire because that's just smart. So he goes, gets all the top 30 under 30, changes their name, gives them Babylonian citizenship, and he wants to basically create an international city out of Babylon so everybody would look to them to go, look how great Nebuchadnezzar is, and look how amazing his empire is. So he gets all the 30 under 30. Verse 4, the young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, high IQ, high EQ people, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in what? The king's palace. Now, if you're the 30 under 30 list, This is a good gig. Normally when you get overtaken by another empire and carted away, that doesn't go well for you. In this case, this was phenomenal. In fact, I guarantee you some of their dads before they left are like, don't screw this up. There's other people waiting in line. You made the list. Don't screw this up, because this meant, even though they were carted off to another empire, they did not have to work the salt mines. They did not have to go into the military and, high casualty rate. They didn't have to work construction. They would literally not live in like the in-law suite. They would live in the king's palace. 5-star accommodations every single night. It's an incredible gig. They won the lottery. And then verse 5, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine at the king's table. So not only do they get to live with the king, high thread count, best of the best, they also have a built-in meal plan. Now, it's not a big deal for us. In the ancient world where food was scarce, and there's a ton of food in scarcity, people often went hungry. People often starved. These guys would never have to worry about that again. They would have the best food, the best wine, the best accommodations, and they'd never have to worry about it. And then into verse 5, they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the what? The king's service. So maybe you know some of this story, but the Fab Four were involved in this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Daniel. And if you don't know any of those names, don't worry about it. A bunch of you don't, it's fine. But if you grew up in Sunday school, you learned some of those names. These guys were the best and the brightest. And so they would take these guys, they would give them Babylonian citizenship, and then Nebuchadnezzar would rename them because he just wanted to show off that these guys are my property. I mean, that just tells you what kind of person Nebuchadnezzar is. So if you've ever gotten a pet or something like that, they have another name, you get the pet because it's yours, you rename the pet. Have you done that before? We have a small farm that is growing a little bit out of control that my family has, and it's small. It's still small. But it's small, but things keep showing up like out of nowhere. So one of the things we did those a few months ago, or maybe that was about a year ago, we're like, okay, you got talking to the kids, you can name the animals whatever you want. So they got all these crazy names and stuff. But then somewhere along the line, they started naming our animals like goats and pigs, like people that we know, which is a little bit of a problem. And so this is no exaggeration. There's 2 different occasions where I'm talking to somebody who knows this really well, and I don't know, they were asking about the farm, and I'm like, such and such just died. Yeah, and their eyes get so big, and I'm like, I am so sorry. I'm talking about a chicken right now, not your brother, because they're naming it after people that we intimately know. So anyway, it's become an issue in our home. Like, stop naming these after family members and people. So anyway, they would take the people, rename them, give them Babylonian citizenship, and basically Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to know, okay, my gods are going to be their gods. I'm the final authority over there. Basically, I am their God, and this is what they're going to submit to as part of the Babylonian Empire. And then Daniel. This is one of my favorite verses. Daniel 1:8, Daniel resolved. Then in light of all of that, incredible opportunity, a lot of pressure, Daniel resolved. Or you hear me talk about this too a lot. Daniel pre-decided. Daniel made up his mind ahead of time before he got the option, before the emotion of the situation, before, all of the stuff that was coming in around that makes it easy to give in, and you got all these voices in your mind. Daniel pre-decided. I mean, I talk about this all the time, even in relation to showing up for community, showing up for the church, not just for what God wants to do in you, but others. So we'll talk about, don't say, are we going, but pre-decide, yes, we're going, because what you don't pre-decide, your feelings override. 3 people have been listening to that. So, but it's true in every area of our life. There are certain things that if you don't make up your mind ahead of time, the pressure of the moment, the comparison and the pressure you feel from somebody else, the emotion of what's going on, what's at stake, can cause you to go off the rails or compromise your integrity in a way that you had not intended previously. And so Daniel, before he's presented with the opportunity or the emotion, he resolves that he would not do what? Not defile or literally compromise himself with the royal food and the royal wine. And people in the empire, though, had been thinking, okay, Daniel, just knowing the opportunity you got, chill. You don't need to make some big, have the moral high ground or make some point out of all of this. And you got to accommodate to the nation that you're, the kingdom you're a part of. Don't make an issue out of the food or the wine. Why is that even a big deal? Just go with it. Now, when I was growing up, I had no idea why this was a big deal. This passage never made sense to me. I assumed it was because I grew up Baptist. And so I was like, well, the issue must be the wine. Like, he can't drink wine, and he probably can't go to the movies. But that must be the big deal. It has nothing to do with that. So this is why this was a big deal to Daniel that I think is instructive for us. Many of you have prayed, or maybe it's a part of your prayers you grew up with it with a grandma or something, where people will pray, bless this food to our bodies, nourish it, strengthen us. You ever prayed that before or heard somebody like, bless the food, nourish it to our bodies? It's basically a prayer that communicates a chain of events that in the ancient world, they actually took literal. That it was like God provides, sustenance, God makes the crops grow, God, fends off the locusts. Everything is from God, and then from God, you get food, you get body, ultimately it leads to health, and then prosperity. This was the issue for Daniel, just real quick, to give you the context, is that Marduk was the god of the Babylonians. And so in their minds, Marduk, the god of the Babylonians, was responsible for all the provision and all the sustenance and the food and their health and their wealth and their prosperity. It all was accredited to the Babylonian god Marduk. So literally they saw it as Marduk, who's responsible for everything, provides everything. We worship Marduk, this false god, and then the food and the body and the health and the prosperity. And so literally, Daniel's success, whatever success he had from this point forward, his intelligence, his prosperity, all of it would be attributed to Marduk. And so Daniel decided or pre-decided, I am not going to give any evidence that Marduk is any more than a figment of Babylonian imagination. Because it basically, to the people in history at this point, felt like that the Babylonian god Marduk had won and Yahweh had lost. And honestly, there was evidence to that fact. Because the Egyptians had been overrun. The Israelites had been overrun by the Babylonians. Yahweh looked weak. Marduk looked like he might be this idol looked like he might be God. And Daniel pre-decided, made up his mind, I'm not going to give any evidence that this false idol or God is worthy to be worshiped. That's why it was a big deal. And I can't overstate this. Can you imagine the pressure for Daniel? Can you imagine the emotion? Can you imagine the pressure from other people he was with? Can you imagine with all that was at stake? That it would be easy to compromise, or why don't you just eat it or pretend you're eating it and feed it to the dogs under the table and go your way? Can you imagine how much pressure he felt? And yet Daniel, this is such a big deal, pre-decided. Daniel made up his mind ahead of time, before the option even came, before he felt the emotion, before the pressure of the moment that we've all felt, where all of a sudden when you're about to sign on the dotted line, or there you are and you got the hotel room, or suddenly you're tempted to cover it up because they confront you, or then that thing happens. There's just one deal, and if we can get it done, I got to compromise my integrity a little bit, but it's going to be worth the financial payout. And when you get to that moment, in 90% of the rest of your life, you'd never make that decision. Daniel pre-decides. He makes up his mind ahead of time that he's not going to give into this and give evidence that Marduk is legit. And so when you read that, you think about your own story, and I think about my own story. Those moments, and there's been a lot of moments where I haven't done this. I think there's been moments where you haven't either, probably, if you're honest, where we haven't got it right. We didn't pre-decide. All of a sudden, the emotion of the moment, the options get us, or we just feel the pressure. We feel like we got to keep up with or whatever. But when you decide ahead of time that there's certain things you're just not going to do, certain things your family's not going to do, certain things you're not going to give into, certain things you're not going to weigh. When you decide ahead of time with that self-control, or really what I think is the power, if you're a Jesus follower, the power of the Spirit of God that is inside of you to surrender, to do things that you couldn't do in your ordinary strength, that when you're able to do that, you set yourself up to experience what Daniel experienced. But when you don't do what you ought to because of how it may cost you, you miss out on writing a story that might impact literally multi-generationally. Next week, I'm going to tell a story about my dad that impacted my life significantly. He had no idea that story would impact my life significantly. Somehow Daniel was able to move back in the moment, and he was able to remember something that we forget or generally remember too late, and it's this, that one breach of integrity always leads to another. And suddenly, you don't normally do it. I wouldn't normally make that decision. We wouldn't normally go there. This is just for this season, whatever. And it's just, you wouldn't have considered it any other season. But it's just that one thing, that one isolated decision. But the problem is one breach of integrity leads to another. And isn't it true? The first breach always makes the second breach easier. I mean, like once the floodgates are open, once you've already told the story, and then you got to manage the story a little bit more. Once you've already given into it, once you've already tried it, all of a sudden it just becomes easier. And then what we forget sometimes, because we think, what's this an isolated decision? It's just an isolated 2 decisions. What's this isolated 5 decisions? It's just a thing. It's just this season. It'll be different down the road. All of a sudden, without realizing it, the second breach creates a pattern. And as I learned from a mentor of mine years ago, that ultimately sets the direction for our life. It's not one decision. You don't wake up one day to go, I want to compromise my integrity and end up in a place I don't want to be. It is a series of small decisions that sets a direction. And direction, not intention. Direction, not your prayers. Direction, not your hopes and dreams. Determine destination. You cannot live or compromise your integrity in one direction and then pray and intend your way in another direction. It just doesn't work that way. That direction, not intention, determines destination, and ultimately it determines your story, even your legacy. And so Daniel made up his mind ahead of time, even if it would cost him time, because it could potentially cost him his life. And Daniel, verse 8, asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself. And again, he didn't try to pretend or deceive. That would have been a lack of integrity. And what Daniel decides to do right here sets the stage for everything that God's going to do in the future. And just lean in if you just miss all the rest of this or you want to get on Facebook in a second. Don't miss this part. Daniel decides to do what he ought to do, even though he has no guarantee of the outcome of that decision. And basically, Daniel positions himself to go, the only thing I've got working for me is that I believe that you are a God that's good. I believe that you ultimately have authority over my life, not Marduk and not Nebuchadnezzar. And so I am going to do the right thing, even though I don't know how it's going to end. And in essence, Nebuchadnezzar is placing himself under the mercy of God, something that Nebuchadnezzar had no vocabulary for. 1 Peter 5:6 says it this way. This is a verse that I picked up from my dad that I heard often growing up. That if you humble yourself, therefore under the mighty hand of God, that in due time, God will lift you up. And that's not a promise of a particular outcome. It's a promise that when you decide that I'm going to do what's right, even if it costs me, even if it hurts, you are placing yourself under the canopy of God's authority and God's mercy, and you are opening the door for God to intervene in your life. And there's no guarantee what's going to happen, but I'm telling you, this is a better place to be than placing yourself in a circumstance where you're trying to control the outcome. And come on, all of us have been there. And depending on like your wiring, maybe even more, you're trying to control what happens next. You're trying to predict the future. Its means justifies the ends. And all of a sudden, God still loves you. God's still with you. But God leaves it to you to take responsibility for the outcome. And you shut the door on God's opportunity to intervene in your life. Don't ever shut the door to God's opportunity to intervene because you're afraid of what your integrity will cost you. Let me say it another way. Basically, when we sacrifice integrity to get ahead or protect ourselves, we close the door to God's opportunity to intervene. We close the door to now God moments in our life. Now, here's the thing. Somebody should have just told Daniel this, because that would have helped. Like if God would have just come to go, hey, just Daniel, just so you know, you're going to do the hard thing. You're going to have no guarantee of the outcome. You might lose your life, but don't worry, it's going to work out. There's going to be a now God moment that's going to be the catalyst for the rest of your life. Then Daniel would have been like, great, awesome, thanks. I'm not even stressed about this. The same would be true of us if God would just show up to go, hey, don't worry about the relationship. He's a loser. After this one, you're going to get a much better relationship. It's going to be amazing. Edit that part out of the podcast. Sometimes I'd get away from myself. Like whatever, the other thing, like the deal, the job, like if God could just show up to go, it's going to be fine. Trust God. It's going to be hard, momentarily painful. God's got even something better. God's got something up ahead for you, but we don't know that. And it's worth finding out anyway. Daniel did what he ought to do, even though there was no guarantee of what was coming next. Don't shut the door on a now God opportunity. You have no idea what God might do on your behalf. But now God, here's how the rest of it goes. Should have told Daniel, would have helped. God caused the officials to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? Basically, he's given us all the same diet, So if you don't adhere to it and you look worse, it's going to be bad for me. In fact, he says, the king would then have my head because of you. Now, to us, this is figurative. To him, this was literal. In fact, if you wonder where this saying comes from, this is it. The guy's like, he's literally going to have my head if this doesn't work out well. And basically, Daniel's like, I just want you to trust me and do it anyway. And so Daniel proposes a 10-day fast where he would just eat vegetables and just drink water rather than the king's meat and wine. Now, just real quick, this is just a total side note. I got to keep moving. But in the early 2000s, you grew up in the church, the church marketed this as a diet plan and called it the Daniel fast. And anyway, that's not relevant at all to what I'm talking about, other than a series coming soon called Stupid Stuff That Christians Market in 2026. Anyway. And if you were on that, I sincerely apologize. I didn't think that part of it through, but I don't even know where I was at. Oh yeah. So Daniel's like, okay, so I'm just going to do it, and then you compare. And if we're looking worse, then you can make a decision then. So verse 13, treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Like if you don't like it, if we look like we're malnourished or whatever, do whatever you want. Such integrity by Daniel. We'll take responsibility for that because I know it'll probably mean our life. But just trust us. And then verse 14, so he agreed, and they tested them for 10 days. And they looked healthier and better than all the people who ate the king's food and wine, partly because they didn't have any idea about anything dietary, so like drink water. I mean, that was all novel. And so Daniel looked better than all the rest, and so it worked out. And then 3 years go by, and they finished the apprentice program, him and his 3 friends and the other people who were brought over. And at that point, they're interviewed by Nebuchadnezzar, and it says, this is so powerful, the king, after the 3-year internship, the king found what? None equal to Daniel. And this is their Babylonian names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. And then, skip one verse. This next verse never registers with anybody because we don't know the context. We just keep on going. Or like, oh, I'm bored. Go to the New Testament, read about prayer, whatever. But this next verse, I'm telling you, is so unbelievably powerful. It's so amazing. If you know the context. Here's the next verse, or one verse over in 21. Daniel, what does it say? Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Just so you know, King Cyrus is a couple kings later. He went through Nebuchadnezzar, regime change. He went through King Darius. Then he's still there with King Cyrus. Daniel is there the entire time. Do you know how much time this represents? Do you know how long this period of time was? 7 decades. For 70 years. Because of his life, because of his integrity, because of his just choices, his decisions. For 70 years, Daniel has the ear of the most powerful men in the world. And it all started with the decision he made at 15. Rewind back a little bit. Daniel's 85 at this point, but rewind back to when he's 70. Right in the middle was probably his greatest test of all. He's 55 years into these regimes. Nebuchadnezzar's gone. Now he's under the 3rd king before Cyrus, Darius. Darius's Persian Empire comes and overtakes the Babylonians. You can study all of that historically. It's a historical fact. When that happens, Darius decides, well, I'm going to reorganize the empire, which was common. I'm going to create 120 governors because I don't really want to do anything anymore. And then I'm going to appoint 3 administrators, and he appoints Daniel as one of the 3 administrators over those 120 governors to lead the empire or to lead the kingdom. Daniel's about 70 years old, and here's what it says in Daniel 6:3. Now Daniel distinguished himself among the administrators and the governors by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. It's incredible. At this, the administrators and the governors tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs. I mean, how hard should this be? I mean, he served for 55 years in the highest levels of government. Should take you all 30 seconds. And they're in the highest levels of government. So they're like, well, he's got dirt on him. He's got to have skeletons in the closet. And by the way, at that time, they literally had skeletons in the closet. They would just collect kings that they would kill and they would show to people. So we've got to be able to find him out. In verse 4, this is so incredible. But they were unable to do so. They could find what? No corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. I don't even know many of you. That's something to aspire to. That even when somebody goes looking, they can't find it. And just important note, maybe encouragement for you. It's not because you don't have a past. Integrity, I've said it all series. Integrity is not you never mess up. Integrity is you don't mess up and cover up. Integrity is you mess up, you try to clean up, you try to reconcile, you don't hide it, you don't tell yourself lies. So even when somebody comes knocking, yeah, I got a past. Yeah, I've got stuff, but you can't hold that over me. I already owned it. I've already moved on. I'm not lying to myself. There's nothing that you're going to find when your ex comes knocking, when that group comes knocking, when that individual comes knocking, because you have lived in the direction of integrity and it has guided you. And Daniel was that person at 70 because he made up his mind at 17. I mean, come on. This is the kind of people you want at the highest levels of government. This is the kind of people you want leading a community. This is the kind of people you want in your neighborhood. This is the kind of people you want your daughter to marry. It's so you just intuitively, you just know, don't you? But his enemies knew that his integrity was somehow linked to his faith in God, and they hated it, and they were jealous of it. So verse 5, finally these men said, this is crazy. We're never going to find any basis for charges against this dude, Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of God. Literally, the only thing we can find on him is he's just too devoted to God. I mean, what if somebody comes knocking on your life and the only thing they walk away with is they're just so devoted to Jesus? Like, that's the only thing they can find. Can you imagine? Like, it's the only thing that they could find. And we'll talk about it more next week of how do we leverage that, because there's nothing in regard to his integrity, because Daniel's integrity guided him. Because the integrity of the upright guide them, direct, inform all of their decisions, even when it's hard. And Daniel's faith was anchored to a God that was outside of him, that had authority over him in the best possible way, and he surrendered and submitted himself under his mercy and believed that that God was good and that God was worthy to be trusted, even when that decision to maintain his integrity might cost him. And it's the reason that Daniel had the courage to pre-decide and make up his mind ahead of time. So next week, I want to look at the other part of Daniel's story. So do not miss next week. Do not miss next week if you're online. But to talk to us for a second, what about you? What about us? What about, because I know, and again, I don't even need to know you or know your story. I know how this hits human beings, because we all have areas we know. We have areas, to go back to last week, there are appetites that we know if it is the right circumstance and the right pressure and the right temptation, we're sunk. We know that there's certain things, if the things just align right, we're tempted to hide it. We're tempted to not tell her the truth. We're tempted to cover it up. We're tempted to kind of circumvent what we really know is the noble thing, because the means justify the ends and because of where I want to get. So I just want to ask you this question. Have you made up your mind? Have you made up your mind in regard to your life, that there are certain areas, but just my life in general, that I want to do what I ought to, even when it costs me, even when I'm not sure of how it's going to work out, even when I'm sure of where it's going to head? I'm going to pre-decide certain things. I'm going to pre-decide who I want to be. I want to pre-decide how that I want to live, and I want to do it before the options are presented, before the emotion, before the comparison, before I'm trying to keep up with, before I feel baited into it, before I have their voices in my ear. I'm going to decide now. It's not going to do it. We're not going to go that direction. We're not going to give into that. We're not going to make that a priority. We're not going to make that central to our life. If that comes because of my integrity, I have already pre-decided. No. Can I just be honest? And man, I found myself at this place in so many seasons. It's hard to do because we live, and our culture kind of lives for the next opportunity and for the next relationship and for the next moment and the next day, and kind of see what life brings, and we'll figure it out as we go. And can I just lovingly, can I tell you what's behind that we don't want to admit because we're in church and we struggle to be honest? Is there's this kind of inside of us, there's this feeling of holding on to my integrity will cause me to miss out. That's what's behind that. Might miss out on it, on him, on her, on that opportunity. And if we'd never say this, but just to say blanket, I'm holding on to my integrity, that feels a little bit constrictive. What if that opportunity comes and I might need to, finesse it a little bit? What if that thing comes where it's like, everybody in that situation lies, subtly. It just feels too limiting. It just feels like, what am I going to miss out on? What am I going to give up if I move in this direction? And I just want to be so incredibly clear. If there's no ought to that stands outside of you, it doesn't really matter. But if there is, you have every reason to trust your Savior with your future. And here's what will happen if you don't pre-decide about certain things in your future. If you don't pre-decide, fear will guide you. And more specifically, FOMO will guide you. And it just will. And you live in a generation where the pressure to compete and to keep up and to compare is greater than any other generation. And that you can end up making decisions based on the pressure that you feel from somebody else that aren't even best for your life or your kids. And listen, you're going to give something up. You hold on to your integrity, it's going to cost you. You will pay a price, but if I can just kind of get us all on the same page for a second, maybe they're out there, maybe you're this person, see me after service. I've never been anybody who looks back at a previous season of their life and goes, I wish I would have lived with less integrity because I feel like I would have gained more. We know intuitively that whatever you give up to maintain your integrity is worth ultimately what you gain. And come on, the world doesn't need more leaders like that. There's too many of them. In fact, I think we live in a culture where we've dumbed down integrity, and sometimes we celebrate lack of integrity because if the means justify the ends, lack of integrity is just getting it done. We don't need any more leaders like that. We don't need any more people like that. We don't need any more fathers and mothers like that. We don't need any more communities like that. You don't want to be that. You don't want to be known for that. I mean, come on. You should hang this on the dashboard of your car. This verse from Daniel. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and he was neither corrupt nor negligent. And that's the person you want to be. You are inspired by that, and I don't even know you because that's the kind of person that came to mind when I asked you the question, what do you want to be like when you grow up? So pre-decide. It will cost you. You will pay a price. It will be worth it. Decide now to do what you ought to before it costs you. Decide to be the person you want to be and who you ought to be. And then last thing, I'm going to leave you with this. In those moments where you get to the precipice and suddenly, maybe for the first time, your integrity begins to cost you, can I just encourage you, hang on. Do not give up. Do not walk away. Do not change your theology to try to match your circumstances because you are perfectly positioned with no guarantee of the outcome or the future, but you are perfectly positioned to do what you ought to even when it costs you for God to come through for you. You are in a place where you keep the door open for a now God moment for God to intervene. Don't ever close the door on a now God moment because you are afraid of what it will cost you. You have no idea what God wants to do through that decision or your life. Don't miss finding out. Would you guys pray with me? And I'm going to have you stand one more time because I know that this hits in a million different directions. And so I want to just pray how God is leading you right now. Jesus, I thank you for this moment. I thank you for what you're doing in this moment. And I'm well aware of what the Spirit of God does. And I know there's some people in the room still trying to figure out faith, which I love and I get that. So this is, we might attribute it to something else, but I believe it's the Spirit of God moving and working in this room, that there, even right now, what some of us feel is what we just talked about, is that there is an ought to that stands outside of us that presses on our conscience, and we didn't make it up. We didn't create it. We can't shake it. And it is often misinterpreted, but it is your divine grace and your love to go, I want you to deal with this. I want you to be honest about the past and stop lying to yourself. I want you to own this thing. I want you to pre-decide about this next season, and as you head off to the rest of this semester, or as you're about to get married, or where the career trajectory and what things look like at 32, or what you're going to do in this next season as a retiree. I mean, wherever we're at in life, to pre-decide, to make up our mind about certain things. And even when we feel like or have a hunch that it might cost us, that we would trust you, that we would place ourselves under your mercy and under your authority. That you are good and you have the desire to lead us to life to the full. So help us to believe that. And we pray all of this in Jesus' incredible name. Amen.